Pierre Deleuze, towards a sociological study of canonized sainthood in the Catholic Church, 1983, provides a seminal framework in which the differences between sanctification, and canonization are codified in order to interrogate the distinction between the true and constructed saints, wherein communal support of local saints and their cults are central to the understanding of sanctity and canonization. One of the problems with the paradigm is the lack of attention to the sanctity of female mystics, particularly the historical reality of gendered experiences of the rigid construction of sanctity controlled by ecclesiastical officials in Rome and within monastic communities. I argue that Deleuze's conception of sanctity should be interrogated against the issues of those gendered experiences in the late medieval period and Renaissance, wherein female mystics are increasingly regarded with suspicion over their experiences, and the local veneration of female mystics comes into direct conflict with the ecclesiastical procedures. Moreover, popular female saints, specifically Catherine of Siena, are regarded with suspicion by ecclesiastical leaders due to their gender and the issue of the porosity of the female body, wherein holiness and sanctity becomes an issue. During life, because ecclesiastical officials often regard female mysticism as emanating from diabolical sources instead of divinely inspired revelations and suffering. The communal memory of Catherine, combined with the issues inherent in the true/constructed sainthood of Deleuze, illuminate a liminal space wherein experiences of the female mystic are obscured by the popular veneration of sanctity and miraculous intervention promoted by her biographer, Raymond. In juxtaposition to the Catholic saints, holy women in the Islamic world are seen as authentic and true saints, and male clerics do not interrogate their experiences. The delineation between these two receptions highlights the ways in which the Catholic Church was concerned with policing female bodies and spiritual expression. I contend that Deleuze's theory, in tandem with the disability theory, reveals the reality of gendered issues of Christian sanctity in the late medieval period. Women's pious practices and mystic experiences came under increasing scrutiny during the late medieval period, and as Nancy Catacolia notes, women were much more likely to be interrogated and their experiences deemed deceitful based on their gender and status as spiritually open to demonic attack. The role of Deleuze's theory of sanctity highlights that the life of Catherine is often overlooked or edited in order to emphasize the positive attributes, such as miracles, political involvement, and mysticism, and thereby Catherine's sanctity is constructed without taking into account the ecclesiastical conflict occurring during and shortly after her lifetime. She faced staunch ecclesiastical disapproval and interrogation, causing her to become spiritually disabled, wherein Catherine's agency is stripped away in the eyes of the Church because of the continual questioning of her experiences, holiness, and sanctity. While Deleuze's argument is the starting point of deconstructing the reality of sanctity in the late medieval period, I argue that for female mystics, the reality of the true constructed paradigm is much more complicated via ecclesiastical control of the definitions of mysticism and sanctity. For example, Muslim female mystics such as Rabia of Basra were readily accepted in the society, and Rabia was positioned during a period where Sufi streams of thought were becoming central to the medieval Islamic world. She is one of the first mystical figures of Islam, and the only woman who was cited in the early works in Sufism. Fatima of Nishapur is also another major medieval mystic, and the manuscripts do not note any type of scrutiny about their mystical experiences, unlike how Catholic mystics, such as Catherine of Siena, were forced to continually undergo interrogations about their experiences. One of the reasons for the intense ecclesiastical scrutiny of Catherine of Siena's ecstatic visions, and the physical stigma is the fact that women's bodies were deemed frail and open to attack, as they possessed wombs and were spiritually porous. The term porosity comes about after the 12th century, through the ever-widening scope of medical theories about the four humors and their role in regulating the human organism, led to learned explorations of how different kinds of bodies might be more or less vulnerable to spiritual invasion. And medieval medical theories focused on the female body because the female humoral balance, it was said, was characterized by a greater physical openness or porosity, which permitted freer entrance to possessing spirits. Deleuze's paradigm about the nature of sainthood and sanctity, while useful to understanding Catherine's popularity, does not take into account the reality of the effects of the ecclesiastical interrogation on undermining the female mystic's spiritual communion with God. Questions of porosity highlights an attempt by ecclesiastical officials to undermine female mystical experience, especially in the case of Catherine, and those interrogations spiritually disabled by her marginalizing her experiences based on her gendered body. Unfortunately, Deleuze does not account for the reality in which Catherine and other female mystics were forced to prove themselves, often well after their death. One of the ways that historians can grapple with this problem is by using digital history techniques, such as digitizing variants of texts of vitae, as well as constructing digital projects that emphasize comparative lives of female mystics of different religions to gain a better understanding of the reception of female mystics. Donald Weinstein and Rudolf M. Bell in Saints and Society, Two Worlds of Western Christendom, 1000 to 1700, highlight that there is a divide between the popularity of saints among the laity and the acceptance of the saints by the clergy. At one point, the authors make that both the laity and clergy examine the mystic's supernatural experiences in confronting the supernatural power of cult figure. The church's problem was to determine whether this power came from God or the devil. From the outset, supernatural occurrences such as stigmata and visions were interrogated against evidence of diabolical influence, but beginning in the 13th century, these interrogations were more frequent, especially involving women, even though the percentage of women saints increased in the 13th to 15th centuries. One of the ways in which to view disability, particularly spiritual disability, is through the power of structure of ecclesiastical normative confinements of religious devotion and behavior, especially through the overarching anxiety of spiritual discernment of mystics, visions, and stigmata. Female Italian mystics are therefore isolated because of their potentiality for spiritual degradation through the gendered issue of corporal porosity. Ecclesiastical officials become the overarching hierarchical power structures that work to minimize the social and cultural impact of women, deemed spiritually disabled through their physicality and othered appearance within Italian society due to the interrogation of mystical experiences. The anxiety prompted by the reputation of the uncanny in disability affects the role of power and gender in the historiographical record of female mysticism. Overall, spiritual disability, i.e., the ability of ecclesiastical officials to use the body and gender in order to marginalize Italian female mystics, works to cripple female bodies, minds, and spirituality in order to force the capitulation of proper spiritual and bodily behavior in medieval Italian society. While the role of mystical experience is ideally an edifying personal response to the divine and communal ideals, the inherent patriarchal power structures of the clergy worked to undermine women's experiences and interrogating the religious institutions, creating spiritual disability, allows for a more substantial understanding of female mysticism in medieval Italy. Deleuze's sociological study of sanctity provides a starting point to understanding how lay and ecclesiastical populations conceive of sainthood and the miraculous, but in the high and late medieval world, the reality of experiences of female mystics is much different. Catherine must undergo continual scrutiny in order to validate the truth of her sanctity for ecclesiastical officials. But for the lay populations, she helped during her lifetime, and the events after her death and canonization, the constructed nature of her sanctity overlooks the conflict she faced in life.